So what do we know about C15, about how it interacts at the cellular level? Like which pathways or receptors does it influence?
It plays a critical role in strengthening our cell membranes. C15 is able to basically fight against oxidation, and that's called lipid peroxidation. The whole role of C15 is, as an essential fatty acid, is to maintain balance.
First of all, it does lead me to the subject of, like, from a dermatological standpoint, how does
Right.
C15 influence the skin? Okay, Stephanie, like we have chatted off air, I am a huge fan, a huge cheerleader. It's not really, because it means that you are hearing me, but I am a person that constantly wishes good things for you and what you are doing, because I am such a an avid user and believer in what you guys are doing. That is why the minute I heard about your new development, I had to have you on again. So welcome back to the Biohacking Beauty podcast.
Oh, Amade, it's always a pleasure chatting with you.
Yeah, and so I just want to let you know that I think also thanks to Dr. Mercola, like our podcast together was one of our most successful podcasts. So
Amazing.
yeah. Um, So first of all, assuming people did not, I hope listeners listened to the last episode, but maybe we should start just in case. Like, let's go through the quick origin story of C15. How did you first like identify it as a potential health promoting fatty acid? And let's talk about that aha moment that you had.
Yeah, absolutely. So, when we talk about longevity molecules, which was not how the discovery first happened, Amate, but, when we talk about how are longevity molecules, molecules that help us stay healthy for as long as possible and stave off chronic diseases, how are they discovered? Most of the research, as you know, is done on short-lived species. It's like
Hmm.
mice, worms, and flies. And then there'll be a discovery and they'll be like, oh, a worm lives 2 times longer, and the head which means like a week longer, a few
Hmm.
days
Yeah,
longer, and
exactly.
then the headline on the papers is, "Molecule can double lifespan," right? And
Yes.
so it's and that's and that's an important part of research and the studies that are being
Yeah, but
done.
if it's a molecule like no offense, like a molecule that I take, so I can't say too much bad things about it. Like C60, it's like one mouse study, and then no one wants to touch that study. Like no one wants to look at it again in case they don't get the same result. They're like, shh, no, no.
So it's kind of like, it's great to be able, and we will talk about studies with C15 that do have to, that do
Yeah,
involve short-lived species. But when we talk about longevity, we were given this amazing gift where, instead of understanding how, helping short-lived species live longer, we were working with, and I was working with, as a veterinary epidemiologist, with an incredible population of long-lived large-brain mammals. And, it kind of now makes sense, because it's like, if you think about it, if we talk about how do we meaningfully extend our longevity, nature and evolution has already figured it out. Like,
yeah,
how do mammals like humans, dolphins, and elephants live 30 times longer than a mouse, right?
yeah,
And which is a mammal. So something is there that is already enabling longevity. Let's use those lessons and then figure that trick out and be able to leverage it from there.
yeah,
So that whole discovery came from, I was working with Navy dolphins with the sole purpose of improving Navy dolphin health. As we had talked about previously, the Navy's cared for, the sustained population of about 100 bottlenose dolphins for over 60 years. So and because they get such great care, Navy dolphins live a lot longer than
yeah.
dolphins in the wild, like 2 to 3 times longer. So
Wow.
they live into their 50s and 60s versus 20s.
Yeah,
So because of that, we were able to, like, watch over a 10-year period, a population of geriatric Navy dolphins, and understand that some, but not all, were developing chronic aging associated diseases like high cholesterol, chronic inflammation, fatty liver disease, even the full suite of changes consistent with Alzheimer's. And
Wow.
so, long story short, we were able to go into the Navy archives of serum samples
I
and be
just
able
want
to
to ask,
use.
it's like, do they did they develop like other things? Suddenly they preferred like sparkling water to still water.
It's like, well,
Did,
see, that's like a really good point, right? Because it's like
did yeah.
that left this giant opportunity because unlike us, right, they have a very controlled environment. They live in
Hmm.
the ocean, right? So they live in their natural environment. They eat fish. All they eat are fish, but there were
Hmm.
5 different types of fish, which ended up helping us narrow down, right, the secret sauce, right, to
Hmm.
longevity. And they all had the same healthcare system, drove the same cars. It's like it was it was
The same health
everything.
insurance.
Everything. They don't drink beer, they don't drink alcohol, even though they're Navy Dolphins. So it's like we had all these benefits of this very clean population. And the whole question is like, why are some aging well slower and others are developing these diseases and actually have
Mhm.
accelerated aging?
Yeah.
So we were then able to go in, use this advanced technology called metabolomics, and
Yeah.
look at thousands of small molecules, right? That's in these archived serum samples to see which small molecules in their blood and in their all fish diet predicted the healthiest aging dolphins. And I'm going to take to your point, it was such a clean data set that we were able to see right out of the gate that C15 was the top predictor of healthy aging dolphins. And we thought it'd be omega 3s because they eat fish.
Yeah.
And it was C15, this molecule that fatty acid, I had never even heard of. And, as an added surprise, right, it's a saturated fat. So
Yeah.
that's what started the whole, and this was 10 years ago. Since then, there are now over 100 peer-reviewed publications throughout the world demonstrating C15's benefits.
Yeah. That I want to ask you a small question. Is that why I think conventional, I would say like slow moving dietary recommendation tests don't recommend it yet, or don't really isolate it as a molecule that should, the needle should be moved there? I mean, I'll give an example. I have a friend
Yeah.
who is both an AI researcher, like machine learning researcher, large language model researcher, and someone who is like an avid biohacker. And he plugs everything into different models that he has, and he kind of reads the data, and he only follows. He's beyond event horizon. All he cares about is what the models are telling him. You could tell him, hey, dude, you need to
Right.
brush your hair, you need to shave. He's like, no, the computer told me not to. So like, and when he plugs in his blood tests, I was telling him about fatty 15 because he was interested in skin health. What some of the molecules I can take? I told him, hey, blah blah, spermidine, da, 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 and fatty 15. And he goes, no, 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 fatty 15. I don't need more, because when I plug in my blood tests or my metabolomics tests, it doesn't tell me I am deficient. Is that why? Is it just that that the data is not fed correctly yet?
Yeah, I mean, there's a huge flaw in C15 levels today, right? And
Mhm.
that is, a part of, what you're getting to, which is the dolphins were getting their C15. Some dolphins were getting them from some types of fish that
Mm,
had C15, and there were other types of fish that had no C15. So it actually, their C15 was driven by which fish they were eating, even
mhm,
within the same population. For us, our primary source by far of C15 is dairy fat. And
mhm,
so we've gone through a 50-year experiment of methodically removing and lowering C15 in our diet as we've moved away from, it was 1977, if you think about Congress, it was actually like 5 senators came out with recommendations for dietary changes for all Americans in
wow.
1977. And in that, they said, we must decrease our intake of saturated fats, and the best way to do that is to lower our intake of whole fat milk and butter. So when
Mhm,
we did that, our C15 levels have declined population globally And by doing so, because this is, WHO picked up those recommendations. Like this
Yeah.
is right. So what has happened is what's a normal C15
Yeah.
is around 0.2% of total fatty acids in our blood. That we have learned, and we published last year, right? That not only is C15 the first essential fatty acid to be discovered in over 90 years, we discovered what you would expect, which is a nutritional deficiency. And if
Hmm.
we have low levels of C15, we'll talk about mechanisms, but our cell membranes become more fragile.
Hmm.
It's causing a whole new form of cell death called ferroptosis. And right, and then that accelerates aging and all the downstream diseases. The problem here is that almost everybody is sitting on 0.2% C15. So we're right at the edge of being deficient.
Yeah.
And 1 in 3 of us are deficient. So when your colleague and your friend are looking at the data and saying, "Hey, I'm right there. I'm at normal levels. I'm not deficient," then normal doesn't mean healthy,
Yeah.
because even a healthy population today has 0.2%. If you go to populations like Sardinia, right, and you look at them, and they have a lower in the high longevity zone, where they're living longer and they're less likely to die of heart disease, they have C15 levels of zero point 0.6. So they have
Wow.
3 times higher levels. So there's exactly that. Like, even if you went today to a doctor and you got a test for C15, it would show you like right in the middle. But what we're trying to help understand and educate is that we need to be 50 steps from that cliff, not
Yes.
1 step.
Let me
So,
let in other words, I feel like what you are saying as far as like 50 steps from that cliff is something that I'm trying to explain to people, because intuitively I think people look at longevity is what I call the Phoenix model or the car garage model, which is a model that relies on getting something dysfunctional and nursing it back to health, which we don't our body doesn't do very well. Like, our body is not we're not built to do that. And the other thing is that even if our body would have done it very well, we actually don't know how to do it yet without insane interventions that currently also cause cancer. Like, I'm obviously referring to the Yamanaka genes and stuff like that. Like, insane
right,
things that are very far from being available. Okay.
right.
And what you're talking about is preventative is a very unsexy word, but what you're talking about is kind of understanding that our body constantly has disbalances somewhere. These cause accumulated damage. So being anywhere around like minimal, ranges really means that in some areas you are deficient chronically. Therefore, you are accumulating mistakes and accumulating damage, which our body again is not great at going back and repairing.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah.
And I'll give you an even less sexy word,
Mm.
which is geroprotector, right? And
Uh-huh.
so, and geroprotectors are like, if you talk to a longevity scientist, oh, it's like it's a really important word, because it represents a molecule that, right, exactly what you're speaking to, Amadeus.
Yeah.
Like, it protects us against aging. So geroprotector. So it slows our aging rate and slows the onset of the
Hmm.
diseases that eventually kill us. And
Yeah.
and oh my gosh, like, from a branding standpoint, it's like, the worst word ever, but it
Yeah.
makes complete sense. And so C15, that's where Dr. Nicholas Shorrock and I, Nick Shorrock leads the NIH's Longevity Consortium, and Nick came in and he saw all the things that C15 was doing. And that's where then he said, gosh, he's like, Steph, I bet C15 is going to meet the criteria of a geroprotector. And I said, amazing. What's a geroprotector? But, and then we published that work back in 2020. 3, I believe, in nutrients of that it's, a leading it had better geroprotective properties than rapamycin, metformin,
Yeah,
acarbose. So, and that's how, it came to, the name of the book.
incredible. Yeah, I think longevity is slightly sexier. Um, so again, I really am excited to nerd out about the molecule in this podcast specifically. And if someone wants a less mechanistic, less deeper of a dive, I refer them to the first podcast we did. But I do, you're baiting me here to ask you questions about mechanisms of action. So you know what? You got it. Let's talk about like cellular physiology a little bit. What do we know about how C15, which is trademarked as fatty 15? So I'm just gonna put it out there that we're gonna probably use them interchangeably. So what do we know about C15? About how it interacts at the cellular level, like which pathways or receptors that does it influence?
That's right. So C15 is a pleiotropic molecule. And so that means that it does a lot of things, which is what, again, you would expect of an essential nutrient.
Yeah.
Lots of benefits throughout the body. But we're going to talk about the core benefits here. So the first is that C15 is a saturated fat that has no double bonds.
Hmm.
We usually think we automatically put saturated fats into the naughty category. We now know that there are odd versus even chain saturated fatty acids. Odd chain are those that have an odd number of carbons, C15, C17, even chains are C16, C18, and that the odd chain saturated fatty acids, specifically C15, is the Goldilocks saturated fat that actually has lots of benefits. And because it has no double bonds in it and it's anti inflammatory, unlike the even chain saturated fats, it plays a critical role in strengthening our cell membranes. So it physically goes into our cell membranes, which are made of lipids, right, of fats. And we've learned that it plays a primary role of strengthening our cells against attack by oxygen.
Hmm.
And every time a fatty acid has a double bond in it, which are unsaturated fatty acids by definition, right? So a
Hmm.
polyunsaturated fatty has
Yeah.
multiple double bonds, so multiple points of attack. C15 is able to basically fight against oxidation, and that's called lipid peroxidation, right? So, of
Yeah.
oxidation of fats, lipid peroxidation in turn leads to like a whole slew of issues, but it sets up the cell to become more fragile.
Hmm.
This sets up inflammation. When we talked about this for apoptosis,
Hmm.
this is an entirely new form of cell death that was discovered in 2012 by scientists at the University of Columbia. And since then, there have been over 10,000 papers on
I think,
ferroptosis.
but I think until like 2021, 2022, it was even like disputed as far as like a leading cause of cellular death. Like
Yeah.
people used to think, I mean, like I remember people poo-pooing it, saying, "Oh, no, you would need an unconventional amount of like iron atoms to be excited in order for it to even make a difference." Obviously, since, very early on, when ferroptosis kind of came about as a
Yeah.
potential disruptor or potential DNA damaging effect,
Mhm.
we kind of led the charge as far as like again skin and synthetic vitamin C, which also uh, excites iron atoms. And I remember like you know. I'm not going to name her by name, but like the leading Harvard dermatologist saying that I don't know what I'm talking about. So like so yeah, so I think although you're saying 2012, people need to understand that 2012 is when it was like people started talking about it, as far as like scientific literature. But really we're talking about like 3-4 years of this being
You're
something
right.
that people nod when you refer to it, right?
That you're completely right, Amade, and you were right from the get-go, like, from the beginning, because
Yeah.
we now know that. So this form of ferroptosis, the same year that that was discovered, which you had talked about, the way the definition of ferroptosis are increased fragility of fats in the cell membrane increasing lipid peroxidation. That then mixes with this free iron, right? That's then available, that's shouldn't be in the cell, but it is. That mixes with the lipid peroxidation, results in massive reactive oxygen species, and it knocks out the mitochondria.
Mhm.
The same year that paper was published, we published the discovery of iron overload in dolphins in the liver.
Wow.
Yeah, and so but we didn't know that it would take, what, 15, 13 years to bring it all together, where because, again, the dolphins were such a clean population, we learn the pathophysiology behind C15 deficiencies or cellular deficiency or cellular fragility syndrome, showing that when you don't have enough C15 in your cell membranes, they become weak. They are susceptible to lipid peroxidation. This includes your red blood cells. So when your red blood cells are weak, your liver has cells in it called Kupffer cells that
Mhm.
are specifically there to take out fragile red blood cells and recycle the iron.
Mhm.
So that's great. It's what they do. But when you have a lot of fragile red blood cells, then the Kupffer cells engulf those red blood cells. You have so many of them that the corpses left behind is excessive free iron. So now you have iron in overload in the liver mixed with fragile cells, red blood cells, but also liver cells, lipid peroxidation. That then over a period of, years and even decades spills over into the blood. It then seeds our brain, our hearts, our skin, and all those effects that ferroptosis has globally. We have proven that that is what was happening in the dolphins, and there was only one inciting cause, and it was C15 deficiency. We
Wow.
fixed it when we put C15 back. And then there was also a model in which we were able to definitively show that replenishing C15 into the system fixes the entire, stabilizes the cell membrane, stabilizes red blood cells, fixes anemia. It lowers lipid peroxidation. It stops iron deposition in the liver.
Wow.
So we now understand, a big part of where this all came from. So, Amate, just that was a long way of saying you were right
Yes,
way back
finally.
then.
Anastasia never tells me this ever, so, kidding. Um, so I do have I do have a question because you kind of didn't touch on it yet. Is there evidence that C15 exerts epigenetic changes? In other words, like modifying gene expression in a way that promotes either health at the moment or longevity.
So there are a couple of new papers that have come out that are supporting. So it's not us; it's other groups that are doing work looking at epigenetic changes and looking at the epigenetic clock, our biological versus our chronological aging, and
Hmm.
that was published last year. And it's an ongoing study of looking at biological versus chronological aging in a
Hmm.
cohort
Hmm.
of people. And one of their first publications out of this study showed that people who had higher levels of C15 in their lipids. So understanding C15 can be a free fatty acid, but when we eat it, it gets incorporated into lots of different complex lipids. So you'll have a 15 carbon chain attached to different lipids throughout your body.
Hmm.
And they showed that the more of these lipids that we had that with C15 attached to it, the higher the level, the younger the biological age. And in fact, people with the highest C15 levels had younger biological age than their chronological age, which is what we'd expect. But it's always great to see
Yeah.
that, kind of validation
Hmm.
for us. One measurement of biological age and epigenetic aging is also a marker called RDW, or red
Hmm.
blood cell distribution width. That has really come out as a marker, and it's how variable our red blood cell size is. And you want it to be homogeneous. And the more variable it is, it means that your cells are turning over faster than they should
Hmm.
because they're fragile.
Hmm.
So, the other thing we've been able to show improve is that C15, by stabilizing our cells, including our red blood cells, helps the red blood cell distribution with get stable. And so it's actually stabilizing not just the cells, but our aging rate and stabilizing epigenetic aging too. So it's a lot of exciting things coming on that front. But really, what's been great over the past year is the work of others.
Yeah.
Uh, the world working on C15.
Interesting. Well, you did mention cellular turnover, and I think anyone who only speaks to their service provider, as far as like, I'm going to say something maybe that's not like great, but anyone that is interested in like skin health or the appearance of youthful skin, and he's only talking to the person that wants to sell them a treatment that is in office. The minute that you say cellular turnover, most people would associate it with a very positive outcome. So maybe first of all, it does lead me to the subject of, like, from a dermatological standpoint, how does
Right.
C15 influence the skin? But we can definitely start with cell turnover, because it's not only about the, obviously when we're older we're turning cells over slower normally.
Mhm.
But what is the connection here between, C15 and cellular turnover, especially like skin cellular turnover?
Yeah, that's a great question. So when we talk about cellular turnover, like in the red blood cell perspective and others, it's
Hmm.
the part of aging where our cells become more fragile and then what happens a lot of times is they don't, and that's where, a lot of talk around zombie cells and senescent
Yeah.
cells,
Yeah.
where they get weak and they don't work, but they also don't die. so right, so then you just get this unhealthy, the whole role of C15 is as an essential fatty acid is to maintain balance,
Yeah.
right? So it's important that it, like to your point, that our cells turn over healthily,
Hmm.
and that when it is time for them to die, that they then know to get out and move on and let new cells come in.
Yeah.
So the senescent cells, which gets to other two other mechanisms as far as just throwing in there with regard to longevity, that C15 also has been shown to
Hmm.
activate AMPK and inhibit mTOR.
Hmm.
So with regard on the senescent, helping to prevent the senescent cells and the zombie cell situation.
Yeah.
With regard to healthy cells, they're specific to skin. There have been some really exciting work done looking at C15's role in cell strengthening from an epithelial barrier hypothesis standpoint,
Mm.
right? And so we know that whether it's our epithelial cells are so critical to protecting our body against the onslaught of everything in the
Yeah.
environment, right? Whether it's what hits our skin or what we eat in our food, right? So otherwise we would die. Like
Yeah.
very quickly. And so the epithelial barrier hypothesis is that ongoing exposure to contaminants. It's mainly environmental focused,
Yeah.
but saying that things to which we are being exposed are making our epithelial barriers, so the connection between our epithelial cells, weaker, right? And in our gut, that leads to leaky gut syndrome. In our skin, it leads to like increased exposure, dryness, inflammation. Because
I actually called it. Now it's being usurped completely. I'm fine with it, by the way, and people don't use it correctly. But
yeah.
referring to what you have just described, I used to call it leaky skin. And I
There you go.
and I try to explain. And by the way,
Yeah.
Ara, the CEO of Seed, told me I'm doing it wrong. So, but what I try to explain is that, as opposed to the gut, the leaky skin is leakage of mainly of information, that our skin is now being fed information of distress, of stress, of malfunctioning environment, which then leads to increased inflammation, etc. But Ara said that it applies to the gut as well, so I can't just juxtapose it now.
Oh, okay. All
Yeah.
right. Well, I think that, like, and we know like exactly both of those are working. So the studies that have been done with C15, there were three that came out just within the last 6 months, have focused on leaky gut syndrome. So they focus on epithelial cells within the gut, and they all three showed in multiple mouse models of colitis and IBD and others is that C15 supplementation successfully shores up that the gut lining, stops leaky gut syndrome, actively decreases inflammation. So that's a key thing we need to talk about with the
Yeah.
skin, and helps basically calm everything down. So that's great from a gut perspective. From our skin, when we talk about nutritional deficiencies, especially fatty acids, like linoleic acid and alpha
Actually,
linolenic acid,
yeah.
a deficiency in that is in the mouse models is dry skin, right, and poor
Yeah.
hair. And
Mhm.
so it's standard understood that a fatty acid deficiency or having low amounts of fatty acid is going to have one of its direct effects on your skin. And so it plays a role as a lipid. It
Mhm.
helps. The main thing is also being able to maintain water, right,
Yeah.
within our cells and not becoming dehydrated. And so the lipids help do that. And then in addition, C15 has been shown to decrease 18 different pro inflammatory cytokines directly, not just through
Wow.
decreasing lipid peroxidation. And it does that in part as a JAK-STAT inhibitor, which is one of my favorite mechanisms personally for me from a skin point, because I, my whole life, have had atopic dermatitis and eczema that resulted in my hair falling out, and it just got worse with age. And when I
Mhm.
hit like menopause, just forget it. And C15 helped fix that. It helped calm things down. I got moisture back in my skin. The redness went away, and so it helped. I know personally that it helped with my skin health. Is it the one stop shop to fix everything? No, but I think it's a critical part of just maintaining our cellular health, including and for me especially for the skin.
I think I'll tell you how. I'm sure you know how correct you are, but I don't think it came through the level of correctness because I we don't talk about this often. But I do mention it sometimes. And you've introduced two key terms as far as skin health. One is obviously barrier function, and the other is what we call transepidermal water loss. Okay, so the way I normally explain transepidermal water loss is if you live in Florida like ourselves, you go to Vegas immediately, or your lips are, they are zombies
Oh, it's
themselves.
horrible.
You are lipless for the next couple days. So, and the reason is because you are losing more water to the environment. Your skin is not prepared to deal with it, and you're basically there is more loss of water to the environment, and that is what your lips are experiencing, and that happens to your skin all the time. And one of the things that we're trying to do is maintain that. So skin barrier as a whole is important for that, and especially the makeup of lipids there. And why am I saying that you're touching on something very important? Is because a lot of people, especially in the kind of clean skincare world, which obviously I give them respect for their efforts, but they are using oils as moisturizers. And and most plant oils arrive to the client in an in a subpar state, but 99.9% of the time in a pre-oxidized state, a state of basically of not in the state that they got into the bottle to begin with. And what happens is that you are now diluting your skin barrier's ability to protect from environmental stressors and to prevent that moisture loss. Oils don't actually provide moisture to the skin directly. They don't go to the skin and tell it, "Hey, here's more moisture." Actually, our skin, because it's designed to deal with water, etc., consistently, is not designed anyway to receive moisture from the environment, whether you're putting hyaluronic acid or jet fuel. I don't know what, but don't do that. But
Yeah, don't do that. No, it's not
don't
a
do that.
recommendation for this podcast.
No, absolutely not. But um, w- the surefire way and we know, like, people know that, like, stuff like castor oil or things like that will actually dry your skin. There is a reason. So you're providing oils that are more permeable. And the reason myself, I've been extremely interested in trying to get fatty 15 into skincare, you know is because our journey constantly is a journey of how do we improve the lipid makeup of the skin barrier, because it improves
Right.
everything else, by the way. The one study we published around lipids and dry skin is attaching the lipids that you've just described in a very pristine state to retinol and showing that it prevents the dehydration of the skin that is associated with retinol or retinoids, vitamin A's. So there is a lot of like, so you could even push the skin further. If you're interested in all of those ideas of like, hey, let me go to my specialist and stimulate, renewal and turn over cells, etc., that even as a modality on its own will benefit from something like fatty 15, like this pristine resilient fatty acid added to the skin barrier.
Well, that was fun
Yeah, I know.
conversation.
Yeah. Um,
Yes.
that's me rambling on. So, you know, maybe we'll talk about, specific skin things a bit later, but I do want to ask something about, given the, I think the main excitement I've heard about Fatty 15 from users is neurobiological effects. So, and you've alluded to that as well.
Mm.
Um, how, what are the known effects as far as like cognitive function, neuroprotection? Yeah.
Yeah, so the initial work, so if you look at the body of work, it's really been focused around metabolism, like so metabolic health, liver health, and heart health, like lots and lots on Mate on that. And increasingly now about things like pregnancy and infants and the
Hmm.
essentiality of C15 at that stage. The new frontier for C15 is understanding what is its role in cognitive health. And so it's the area that has the least information, but obviously the most, for a lot of us, the most exciting
Yeah.
potential. And, our brain is made of lipids. And our brain requires oxygen. So those are two knowns. When you mix oxygen with, lipids, as we talked about, that especially the ones with the double bonds, it's kind of like our brain then becomes particularly susceptible to the effects, the aging associated effects of lipid peroxidation, right? And because we can't have the recommendation of don't send oxygen to your brain, right? So,
Yeah.
so we don't have that option. And so, but we do have the ability to influence the lipid makeup of the lipids in our brains. So that's where us studies with C15 are coming into play.
Yeah.
So that's early work. Meanwhile, we had launched Fatty 15 and the research continued. And
Yeah.
we have a chapter in the book, and I don't think I had said actually the name, but it's the longevity nutrient
Yeah.
there. And it, where the folks at the Navy said, Steph, hey, it's great that you discovered, C15 from this work. This is awesome. But like you discovered like 100 molecules that predicted healthier aging dolphins. So let's get going on like what else you got? And
Yeah.
so we're like, okay. So we went back to the data and we found, a handful. So we kind of went to the next 5 in line. And one of those really stood out as remarkably promising, specific to cognitive health. And it ends up that this molecule is called pentadecanoyl carnitine, which is a metabolite of C15. So our bodies take, and we're looking at thousands of molecules.
Yeah.
And like, no, and we did not pick this one because it had anything to do with C15. So here we go. Candidate number 2 from the dolphin work was this gray molecule, which behaves completely differently than C15. And so it's its own, I call it like the baby sister of
Hmm.
like the star. Like C15 is it's the rock star, and this is like the baby sister
Hmm.
of the rock star. And so this molecule, PDC, is basically our bodies take C15 and attach a carnitine to
Yeah.
it, and that's all it is. So it's an acyl carnitine. When we ran that against a bunch of receptors, we found that it fully activated both CB1 and CB2. So
Uh-huh.
cannabinoid receptor
Yeah.
1 and cannabinoid receptor 2. So it's the second ever discovered full acting endocannabinoid, like
Wow.
ever. So we published that back in 2022. And, we know what cannabis is and we
Yeah.
know what it does, and that's why the receptors were named that. But we don't have those receptors for cannabis, right?
Yeah.
We have those receptors throughout our brain and body to help us sleep better, to help us have, better cognitive health, to be able to decrease inflammation in our brain and in our bodies. So why do we have them? We know that we use arachidonic acid, which is an omega-6, to make the first discovered full-acting like our
Mm-hmm.
endocrine means our body makes it. And PDC is the second. So we were meant to get C15 not only to strengthen our cells and to help support longevity, all the things we've talked about, but also to make this metabolite, which helps our mental, decreases anxiety, helps us sleep better, helps with joint pain. And, it just feeds into this bigger picture of the what if, right? I'm gonna
Mm-hmm.
tell you what, that if we've been given a scenario where the world has decreased its intake of C15 and we're all sitting on base or at C15 deficiency, how much has that not only impacted our aging rates and sped up, but how has it also impacted our mental health? Um,
Yeah. 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 Yeah.
So I'm super excited about where that's heading. C15 deficiencies really kicked in at the baby level in the 1990s. So we're
Mm-hmm.
really looking at the generation of that are now in their 30s and younger. And this is the same population of people that are undergoing, just really alarming increases in mental health issues, in increases in type 2 diabetes, coronary heart disease, even certain types of cancer. So it's, there's urgency to be able to say, let's have these types of conversations. And, you just can't explain C15 away,
Yeah.
anymore.
100%. And I look, I want to go over some clinical, preclinical uh, evidence. I do have a question. We're talking so much, we're talking about different impacts on the body, different approaches, and it seems to me, I wonder why write a book now when there is so much that has been studied 100%, but so much that is happening currently. And a book is something so obviously it's not finite. There are iterations, stuff like that, but it's so we're in the midst of this storm. So I wonder how is the book play a part in all of this?
So the book is to help get the conversation going, because we are at the point now, Amate, where you're absolutely correct. Like it continues. Like literally, as I was writing the book and turning in the last, like the last, I'm like, there was like, I like since the book, the final draft was submitted or the final version was submitted, 3 papers came out revalidating C15 as meeting the criteria of an essential fatty acid from independent teams,
Hmm.
in 3 different countries. And I'm like, oh man, if I could. So yes, you're right. We are in the middle of a very exciting time,
You're
especially
adding
about.
you're adding like a note to the end of every book, like, oh, and this happened to.
I just have some inserts right at the
Yeah.
meetings. We just so yes, and I'd say probably once every 2 weeks there's a new paper coming
Wow.
out on C15. However, because of the urgency of what we're talking about, that if you look at the USDA dietary guidelines today, the ones that are active today, not 1977, they mention avoiding all saturated fats
Hmm.
161 times in a 164-page document.
Wow.
So there's too much information, and again, those even chain saturated fats that are present at much higher levels than dairy fats, like 40% of dairy fat have pro-inflammatory saturated fats. It's not that they were all wrong, only 1% of it has C15, but for our kids and infants, they probably do need that milk fat, whether it's from mom, but mom can't be C15 deficient, right? And to be able to, we know now studies showing that babies that get more C15 from mom are more likely to have healthier growth, healthier brain development, and healthier cognitive skills all the way up to 6 years old.
Wow.
So we're at a point where there's so much, there's 100 papers here that we cover in the book, and we walk through, obviously the adventure of the discovery story, which, it took place over a 20-year period.
Hmm.
But it's also really telling the story about all the research teams throughout the world who we now have enough that this is a movement, Amadea. I mean, you've been part of it since the beginning. So you can't, it breaks my heart when, you could still probably talk, well, not you, because not your community, but most people could, ask 9 out of 10 people or 10 out of 10 people, have you heard of C15?
Yeah.
And they'll say no. And
Yeah.
so we can't be at that state anymore. So the purpose of the book is to say, we've had our blinders up on saturated fats. We understand the need for the science world to have to prove out the stake we put in the sand in 2015, in the ground, but now it's proving out. So that's why now it's like, let's get this going, because we can't afford to wait. If fatty liver disease, in fact, is the reason why we went from the first cases of fatty liver disease diagnosed in 1980 by Mayo Clinic to
Yeah.
38% of people today. And if what the data are supporting are that C15 deficiencies are a major driver of a phenotype of this syndrome, but, you know, and our
Yeah.
kids are aging faster than they should, it's time. Movement is on.
Yeah. I agree. And I think there is something about, even if you are someone who is very, who's drinking the Kool-Aid, the C15 enriched Kool-Aid, I think there is a reason like placebo is 30% of the positive results. I think even for myself, I would want to read the book because I believe that there is a psychosomatic effect to loving what you're doing, having a
Mhm.
positive connotation to what you're doing. Even the most cerebral, intelligent, whatever person in the world should encourage the psychosomatic effect to work as well. So I'm selfishly interested in reading the book, obviously.
Oh,
Um,
it's
I we don't have like a lot of time, and I want to go to practical applications. So maybe you can run quickly through human trials, animal studies, where they're at, and if there are any skin related studies.
Yeah, so animal studies, in vivo studies, there have been a lot now. Most of them have focused on mouse models
Hmm.
of fatty liver disease, of type 2 diabetes, obesity. And those have repeatedly shown that C15 supplementation within 12 weeks successfully decreases insulin, glucose, inflammation, IL-6 and MCP1 and TNF alpha,
Hmm.
as well as lowering the amount of fat in the liver and lipid peroxidation. We talked about the studies in the gut of mouse models with inflammatory bowel disease, multiple models showing that it helps heal the gut and help decrease inflammation in models of colitis. Then there's this rodent model of ferroptosis, in which it's the whole suite that we talked about earlier of this pathophysiology,
Hmm.
and showing that C15 supplementation helps fix the entire suite of ferroptosis and cellular fragility syndrome, including treating anemia, stopping iron deposition in the liver, lowering inflammation, lowering cholesterol is another consistent uh, outcome that we've seen and others have
Hmm.
seen across various models. So then when we move to people, there have been two randomized controlled clinical trials with C15 supplementation. Both were published last year or the beginning of this year. And one was, both of them focused on fatty liver disease for the reasons we mentioned.
Hmm.
One was a young population, so they're young adults 18 to 24 years old, had a history of fatty liver disease. They took C15 supplementation for 12 weeks, and it showed a few key important things. One is 2 out of 3 of the people in the study had our definition of C15 deficiency, so less
Hmm.
than 0.2%. That 2 out of 3. So
Yeah.
that was meaningful. For those who took the supplementation Fatty 15 and got their levels up and above that definition of deficiency, they had significantly lowered ALT and AST liver enzymes, which
Hmm.
is the primary issue they had at the beginning of the study. And we also saw an improvement in hemoglobin, not we, an improvement in hemoglobin, which was indicative of these, improved red blood cell health.
Yeah.
And again, this is just within 12 weeks.
Hmm.
The second study was done in Singapore with women average aged in their 30s with fatty liver disease, and they showed that C15 supplementation in 12 weeks lowered LDL cholesterol and also increased the growth of Bifidobacterium adolescentis in the gut. So it helped to improve, which is like a mama microbe that does
Yeah.
a lot of things, right? And it has even been shown to extend longevity, but in worms.
Yeah.
Yeah, I could tell it's a microbe you like. So, in addition to helping to lower enzymes and fat in the liver. So, there's, again, 2 of these clinical trials focusing on the most urgent needs right now for C15 to help fix, this crisis. And that's kind of where the world is at. And then we have these large scale epidemiological studies, prospective cohort studies,
Hmm.
which all, which are there now meta analyses. So studies
Hmm.
of studies tracking thousands of people, over tens of thousands of people over decades, repeatedly showing that the higher the level of C15 people have, the lower the risk of type 2 diabetes, heart disease, fatty liver disease, and certain types of cancers. So you bring that all together, mechanism, in vivo activity, cell-based dose response activities, and and now these clinical trials and prospective cohort studies. And it gets to what Nick Shork says, right? And he says there's no molecule that has more evidence of supporting our health and longevity than C15 that he has
Amazing.
seen at NIH.
Let me ask you. So, what about? Do we have anything, even in animal models, showing specific improvement in skin health? Whether it is hydration, whether it is again like skin, obviously like skin quality, skin aging, markers of skin aging, anything like that?
They haven't. So they haven't done studies on with regard to dietary C15 and skin health. So I'm gonna
Hmm.
tell you, we're ready for
Let's
those
do it.
studies. There was a study done a while ago in a mouse where they would look at its effect on inflammation, and they would like create a little cut in the mouse's ear, and it would swell, and they would apply C15 topically, and they saw that the inflammation went down. So there's an example of a topical
Good.
application.
Good, I'll take it. But this is a good start. I mean, most like I would say like rejuvenation supporting molecules. That's how they start, right? Like with some kind of wound healing application, and we obviously can extrapolate that to longevity. I think that would be an entire podcast. But I mean, this is promising. So I'll just refer to a couple that we now know started that way and are now ubiquitous with skin health. One is obviously red light therapy, and the other one is GHACU, copper peptide. But really, I could name like a million. Um, so let's talk about practical application and usage. So we talked about supplement form. Why offer fatty 15 as a supplement instead of dietary sources? You kind of did touch on it, but we talked about foods rich in C15. Um, why is it difficult to incorporate it naturally um, at the adequate levels?
Right. And because if we could have fix this just by changing dietary recommendations, we would have.
Yeah.
That's what we would have done. And the Navy really invested 10 years of
Wow.
funding. All the studies I've talked about on today were funded by the U.S. Navy. So, which required submitting a grant proposal, defining your objectives, helping to understand. So the Navy understood from the beginning that there are limitations in the food supply with regard to, and especially changes in food, like with the dolphins. It's getting harder and harder to find fish that have adequate C15 levels in them, sadly, because of overfishing and
Hmm.
warmer waters are resulting in fish with less fat.
Hmm.
So Navy dolphins are actually getting supplemented with fatty 15 now.
Wow.
So they really did have a need. And so at the military, it's what we do. We find a need, the Navy invests the money to fix it, and then you fix it. So the
Yeah.
Navy funded even the development of the supplement
Wow.
for this purpose. So that is important to
So
note.
it's a military grade supplement.
The military grade supplement. It is. It really is. I love it. That'll be the next label. So so when we look at foods, like I mentioned, our primary source is dairy fat. And there, when you look at dairy, there have been thousands of clinical trials with dairy fat,
Hmm.
and they are crazy inconsistent,
Hmm.
right? That you can find just as many saying that they're good for you as they're bad for you as they're null. If I had to lean toward anything, it's saying, at least in general, for most people, dairy fat is probably not bad for you.
Yeah,
So
I agree.
we can start there, right? But you don't see the benefits that we're seeing with these clinical trials. And in fact, an example of a mouse study where if Bishop et al., where they had a mouse got C15 and it had lower glucose, lower liver fat, improvements across the board. They gave it C17 just to test and see a different eye chain, and it was kind of meh. It had some anti-inflammatory effects, but not nearly as well as C15.
Hmm.
Then they gave it just straight up milk fat, and it got worse. So it had
Wow.
increased inflammation, increased fat deposition, and they attributed it to the extraordinarily higher levels of C16, which is,
Hmm.
again, this even chain pro-inflammatory saturated fat. Again, 40% of milk fat are these pro-inflammatory saturated fats. So there is a series of studies that they showed a surprising finding in which when you gave rodents high fat diets, which is how by the way, you induce diabetes and obesity, their C15 levels actually went down,
Got it.
despite the fact there was C15 in their diet. And so what that showed was that the hypothesis is that C15 is competing with these other high fats in the food. And it's like a little kid in a subway station trying to make it on the subway when it's
Yeah.
busy. And it's just not gonna make it on the subway.
Y-
So yeah,
I,
the
I,
hence the
I'm
fear.
I'm
The fear.
tempted to say I can't stop myself. I'm going to say something has nothing to do with our discussion. I would say that in game theory, odd number columns or odd number games that rely on odd number of turns are more easily resolved. So maybe we have something there, like as far as like the ability of the body to process odd chain fatty yeah, odd
I
chain
love
fatty
it.
acid. Anyway, so recommended intake for adults. What dosage seem beneficial. We talk about why you decided on 100 milligrams, which is the dose right now in fatty 15, and
Mhm.
for idiots like myself, if one is good, 10 must be significantly better. So a few questions. So I have that. I have like why the dosage that you've chosen. Does
Yeah.
timing matter for absorption? And then what if I'm an idiot?
Okay. So what you're never gonna be an idiot, but I am gonna but
Again,
I
that's
am
what
gonna
yeah.
but I'm
You
gonna
should
tell
be
you not to
first
take
assessor.
10.
Yes.
So the first is the dose. Again, this is a free fatty acid, pure C15 molecule, right, in fatty 15, and so it's readily absorbed. It's 100% absorbed, and that's been shown in extensive human clinical trials.
Hmm.
It's 100% absorbed. So we know, and there are not genetic drivers for C15 levels, which is extraordinary. Like you very rarely not see a genetic influence. A big study
Yeah.
was done on that. So we know that for every 100 milligrams of C15, of the free fatty acid C15 that we take, and then we absorb, that our levels go up by about 10 micromolars. So I'm going to
Hmm.
use this, or 1 microgram per ml. This is equal to around the 0.2, 0.3%.
Got
And
it.
so we know we need to get 1 to 200 milligrams added C15 in our diet per day to get above and beyond, get further from that threshold. So on one point, what you're saying, Amatea, you're correct that the more you take, the further you are from that threshold. I myself have a 0.46 percent C15, and that gives me lots of leeway from being on the edge of that cliff. And I take 2 capsules per day sometimes. And other times I just kind of let my body kind of feel where it's at. And other times I'll take just 1 capsule. So 1 to 2 capsules a day is the recommendation. And those were chosen because the reason why I said the micromolar level is that studies consistently have shown, of all those mechanisms we talked about, of inhibiting JAK-STAT, of activating AMPK, and inhibiting these
Inventory. Yeah.
pro-inflammatory cytokines, the optimal concentration is almost always around this 20 micromolar level.
Hmm.
So everybody is sitting on around a 10 micromolar level because our gut microbes can make some
Hmm.
C15, but not enough to get up and over. So if we're all sitting on around 10, we need to add another 100
Yeah.
micromolars, 100 milligrams to get to that 20 micromolar level.
Did they see any point of diminishing returns?
So that's a great question. With regard to, in some cases, the higher the better. So that's with heart health, and then the population in Sardinia, right, where they're at
Yeah.
0.6. The higher you get, the lower the risk of developing heart disease, which is association, as well as in Sardinia, which is
Hmm.
association. So there's promise there. There is evidence in like mitochondrial health that there's diminishing returns. So when you get between 20 and 50 micromolars, or should be equal to 200 to 500 milligrams per day, it's the height is at, it's like 20, then, if you have 20, then 40 and 50, and then you just kind of get back to baseline.
Yeah.
So I will tell you that we really do mean like holding to that, like 1 to 2 capsules per day, and then just seeing how your body responds. And, physicians are watching if they're more like looking at a person who is dealing with ongoing nutritional deficiency syndrome.
Hmm.
There's a need for catch up, right?
Got it.
So it's really being able to tailor it because there are C15 tests. We can now tailor our dosing to our levels, which is
Got
really
it.
nice.
And speaking about tailoring and customization, are there any known adverse effects or drug interactions? Like who, if anyone, should be cautious about taking C15?
Well, we haven't seen any signs of negative effects. I think it's more of, I'm gonna tell you, the diminishing returns. And this is based upon extensive safety studies. It was included in NIH's Tox 21 program, in which they ran it through 450 safety tests, and it passed all of them. We did our own safety. It is generally recognized as safe. We went through that, FDA process to ensure that it's a safe molecule. And the 2 clinical trials showed there were reports of side effects that were equal in both the placebo and
Okay.
the C15 side. So safe to take. We haven't seen it. Everybody is different. We always include that as a caveat. And so just making sure that, as you take it, you're in, ongoing communication with your healthcare team,
Got it.
and just, being able to mostly, for the most part, pick up the benefits that are coming from it.
Listen, this is awesome. Like I love this. I love this conversation and this ingredient. I have another, like one more question, which is more, I would say, application wise. Um, how you spoke about, bioavailability. Is there anything that we can do to ensure the active ingredient, the C15, is absorbed optimally, or like other cofactors, like other fats or fat soluble vitamins that improve its uptake, or no?
Yeah, it's a great question. At first, we were saying no, but as we're starting to learn more, especially with okay, so if you eat C15 at the same time you eat a hamburger, if you take your C15 supplement at the same time you eat a hamburger, that actually might work against you, right?
Yeah,
Because and then again,
competition.
these are
Yeah.
rodent studies, but if I were to hedge, what I do in the morning is I have my supplement. I take Fatty 15 with my coffee in the morning,
Mm-hmm.
and get to enjoy its benefits throughout the day, but obviously its long-term benefits. So we really need to do the studies to say
Yeah.
if is that the same in people. But if you eat a high-fat diet, it's not that you won't benefit from the supplement. It's just maybe not taking it when you eat
Mhm.
that high-fat meal.
Okay. Last is skin health and interaction with other ingredients. Should people want to improve, if people who want to improve their skin, combine fatty 15? Are there evidence to any combination with other supplements, like certain vitamins or collagen or topical regimen, that have synergistic effects?
That work is currently underway. So we'll just need to have another chat, I guess, another
Done.
podcast.
Done. Okay, fantastic. Steph, you are continue doing what you're doing, and we will make sure that we support in any way we can. We love what you're doing, and we don't kind of play the game a little bit of like, hey, here's our coupon code and do that. But if someone wants to get the product, is there a kind of an offer that is available for, like, maybe first time users or something like that? I know I get the refills, which is pretty cool, but how do people, is there an offer, something that people can do?
There is. There's that. If you go onto fatty15.com and you
Mhm.
sign on for the 90-day starter kit with subscription, it's an extra 20% off. It is super easy to cancel. So if you don't, it's not one of those like, oh man, I got it and now I can't get out. Like we actually have a very high retention rate. And it's not because it's difficult to cancel, it's because people are feeling better. And then I do have to plug that for the book. Like if you want to read it, like it's really been an amazing adventure on the
Yeah,
day. 20 years in the making of the longevity nutrient, and that is by Simon and Schuster, and available wherever books are sold.
amazing. So also like Amazon and online.
Yeah, it's everywhere. So we're real excited. Just finished recording the audiobook
Who
as
who
well.
who is narrating the audiobook? Oh my god! So if you love the voice of this on this
It's
podcast.
not sounding so great today, but yeah, they I'm sure they are able to bring it down nice and low and sexy, or I
Amazing,
don't know.
amazing. Again, Steph, thank you so much. We will make sure that we have the links in the description. Stay tuned for the newsletter associated. We're going to talk a little more about the book and where people can get it, which is everywhere. And yeah, you are awesome. Thank you so much, Steph.
Great. Thanks so much. Always a pleasure.
All right, thank you, everyone. Bye.